first of all, you have to face the reality that you can't know everything.
What are the new emerging roles in tech that you see as a game changer for the industry?
Machine learning, engineering, the data that goes behind it, whether in terms of feeding the data engineering, data science.
Meet Omar Halabieh, the Director of Technology at Amazon Payment Services. With a stellar career spanning over 2 decades in global tech, Omar isn't just a leader. He is a mentor determined to ignite the leadership spark in others and accelerate their career paths. Recognized as a LinkedIn top voice, Omar engages daily with a growing community of over 50,000 followers, sharing leadership and career insights.
What are the strategies that you use that were the most helpful in your career?
When I think about career progress, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, now once you know what is it that you want, knowing that by itself obviously is not enough.
So how do you keep abreast with all the changes?
Dedicating time for continuous learning.
Have you been stuck in your job before?
If you don't feel stuck, maybe at various junctures of your career, you're probably either not pushing hard enough or you may be super lucky.
What makes people more successful than others?
The first thing that I would say is what I would call...
How do you assemble a great team?
The way I look at it is the level of the team really rises or falls based on...
Change is possible. That's it. Please hit subscribe to the show and leave a review or comment about how you find this episode. Hi, Omar. I'm so happy to have you at my podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what sparked the interest in tech.
Sure. So, growing up, when I was in high school, I've always enjoyed sort of STEM, like science and math. I was very much attracted into that space. And so when it came time to decide what I wanted to do in university, to be honest, I wasn't too sure about what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stay in that kind of scientific realm, but not exactly sure what to do. I have an uncle, one of my youngest uncles. He had studied computer science relatively in a similar time frame. And from what I heard from him about it, spiked my interest. At that point, I didn't know much about computers, to be honest, beyond, playing games on it, occasionally using, Word or PowerPoint to do presentations for school. But it sounded interesting. So I really just jumped in and applied for computer science and started university. To be honest, the journey was challenging, I must say. During my first year, especially my first programming course, was definitely challenging. A lot of the folks that were in my class had some programming exposure prior. And so I felt like something was wrong with me, that I didn't understand much of what was happening. And I was really struggling. Compared to the other classes like math, physics, chemistry, I was kind of acing. So I was starting to wonder, did I make the right choice? Is this the right thing for me? And as I got into second year, I think, and things got even more difficult, I really began to question, my choice there. And honestly, I was on the verge of even at some point, I think during the first semester of my second year, deciding to maybe switch majors and go do something else. I recall a very specific situation, even though this is, n number of years ago, where I basically talked to a friend that I had the pleasure of meeting during my studies. He was doing computer science as second degree, so he was much older than me, a lot more experienced, and he was a little bit further ahead in the curriculum than I was. And what he told me is, Omar, stick in it for this semester. After that point, if you see that it's not working out for you or it's not what you want to do, then go do something else. But just wait for that time period. And I don't know what was in that wisdom that he gave me, but I kind of stuck it out. And literally at some point, I remember very distinctly in my second semester, something clicked in terms of me now understanding what was going on, and that passion and enjoyment of the field really came alive. And that was then. I think after that point, I felt like I have found my calling. and really proceeded with finishing my bachelor's, then doing my master's, and really getting into the field of technology to where I am today. But it was definitely, especially those first few years, were certainly very challenging and difficult, and something I really remember. And so for me, if there's maybe two lessons to take out of this situation, is one is like embracing maybe uncertainty and taking a risk, jumping into something. That was sort of my venture into computer science, but then also having the right guidance at the right time has a disproportionate impact on decisions that we make and our careers and lives. And I'm super grateful for my friend at the time, because his advice was really pivotal for me, for my life. So
Great story, and I totally agree with you. When you're at 20, and you have to study. I mean, you have absolutely no idea. I've interviewed so many people for this podcast, and I always ask this question: did you plan to be what you are now, and how did it happen? And everybody, without exception, they all say, "I had no clue what to do. I just tried whatever field, and it
yeah,
worked, or it didn't work, and I tried another one." But
sure.
all right, so you're in tech all your life, right?
Yeah.
And before Amazon, where were you working?
I was working in Direct Energy, which is basically an energy retailer in North America.
All right, so you know the tech sector. What are the new emerging roles in tech that you see as a game changer for the industry?
Sure. I mean, right now it's tough to go maybe a few seconds without hearing about AI and machine learning, especially generative AI. Certainly, both a lot of hype, but also there's a lot of progress being made there. So, in some sense, all the associated roles that go with that, whether in terms of machine learning, engineering, the data that goes behind it, whether in terms of feeding the data engineering, data science, etc. Certainly, very very hot areas. But I would say, in general, the field has gotten a lot more specializations, certainly than when I first started in the field, where, for example, you had just a generic, maybe software development engineer. I think as things have gotten more sophisticated and more complex, a whole slew of roles have opened up in terms of specializations, whether in the front end, in the middle tier, in the back end, with data, etc. So now you have so many different options of specializations to choose from. And there's a lot of exciting opportunities. So I think that as technologies has advanced, it has actually opened up a lot more opportunities. Conversely to what maybe people will think, that as the space sort of matured, less and less opportunities exist. It's quite the contrary. So definitely very exciting. It remains very exciting, and it's constantly changing. One of the things that keeps me drawn into the field is just the pace of innovation and change that you go through. We're not talking like in terms of lifetimes. Within like a year or two or three, you see tremendous amount of change, and I think that's only going to continue moving forward.
It's interesting that you say specialization, because I hear a lot of views, and people say it's more generalization that is happening. We have to in the future be more have general knowledge, and here you're saying specialization. Is it, if you get into the tech roles and all these new roles that you're saying, do you have to have a tech degree, or could it be any other degree?
So I think the way I look at it, Annie, is it's primarily around understanding fundamentals, right? Because it's easy to get caught up, let's say, in the hype and what you see at the surface. Because technology, to use maybe the iceberg analogy, is like there's the shiny visible part at the top, but then there's the massive part at the bottom, which kind of underpins that. And I think it's a lot true in technology in terms of really understanding the fundamentals of each of the areas that you're operating within. And so I always tend to go back to those. And while applications obviously, change quite rapidly and evolve very quickly, the fundamentals, I'm not saying they're static, but they're a lot less volatile in that respect. So going in and really understanding the fundamentals of, whether it's the techniques, the theory behind it, how it works, etc., I think is one of the best sort of advice that I give. whether to new entrants into the field or even experienced folks, is like dig into the fundamentals first, because without that understanding, it's very difficult to, in some sense, be successful, but also have a deep understanding and build that understanding so that you're also able to move between different things or understand new concepts or get going with whatever it is that you're doing in that respect.
Mm-hmm. And when you say fundamentals, can you just specify what that means?
Sure. So fundamentals, what I mean here, Annie, is understanding essentially like what's powering the technology, what techniques are really behind it, the algorithms that support it, the research that sits behind it, as opposed to necessarily the application, which is how is this being used? And so, for example, let's say, sticking on the term of like AI and machine learning, like you may be using a certain tool to do something, like maybe it's to come up with your next post that you're generating, right? So the tools may vary, but essentially the algorithms of what's happening behind the scenes of how that, let's say, your next post is generated, those theories are basically is what I'm talking about in terms of understanding.
Okay, the basics. Okay, you were talking about being successful. What are the strategies that you use that were the most helpful in your career to progress?
Sure. So I think for me, like when I think about career progress, I think the first thing that comes to mind is really about having clarity on what you want to do. And when I say figuring out what you want to do, I'm not talking here necessarily that you need to have your 5 years or next 10 years or 20 years figured out. But even in the shorter run, like for example, have the next 6 months or 1 year, having that target really helps you anchor your development and progress around it. And it's not only important to have that clarity for yourself, but also making it clear, like in the corporate setting, making that clear to your manager, your skip level in terms of what is it that you're looking for to serve as that anchor. Now, once you know what is it that you want, knowing that by itself obviously is not enough. You have to develop some sort of plan to go after it. So understanding what you need to do, doing your research, understanding what it takes to perform, say, at the next level or in a lateral move that you're looking for, doing that becomes important. And I feel like the third important pillar of this is seeking the right support, whether in terms of mentors, coaches, sponsors, but really people who will help guide you through that journey, support you, inspire you, but also sometimes hold you accountable as well to make that progress against the plan that you have. So those are, for me, maybe some of the key, let's say, pillars or elements that I look for in terms of how do we effectively advance, whether your own career or those of others that you're helping.
Why do you think some people are more successful, other people are less successful? So what makes people more successful than others?
I think for me, if I were to think about maybe a few differences that stand out to me, basis a lot of people that I've either led or mentored, etc., I think the first thing that I would say is what I would call agency, right? Which to me, agency is really a combination of like having strong ownership towards situations, but also a high bias for action and getting things done. So these are people that just get on with it and get things done. If I were to maybe summarize that, I think the second part of this is trust. So these, folks that are successful are people that are able to build trust. They build trust in how they engage with people, how they communicate, how they deliver results. They really build themselves up a reputation. And that reputation then acts to attract opportunities towards them and builds connections with others. And I would say maybe the last point that I would make is around impact. So I think high performers and successful people understand that at the end of the day, it's not just about, let's say, the number of hours that you work or how much hard effort or work that you're putting in, but it's really around where is that effort directed, and are you working on things that have maximal impact? And so that to me is probably maybe a combination of three things that I've observed, at least in my career, in terms of what makes these folks stand out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, because at the end of the day, it should not be form of a substance, right? At the end of the day, you have to see something changes, something getting better, and this is your goal, right? Not just.
Absolutely. I mean, it has to translate into outcomes at the end of the day. So I think the combination of the trust and agency directed at the right, let's say, challenges or problems helps you maximize impact. And at the end of the day, it's that impact that is what matters to change things, whether for yourself or for the organization that you work for.
All right. So if we develop on the topic of tech and jobs, if somebody is looking to pivot into a tech job, what, or the tech industry, let's not say tech job because it's very limiting, right? What are these fundamental steps they have to take so they can succeed and find a job in tech?
I think the first thing I would say, going back to the point that I made earlier, I think learning the fundamentals in whatever subspace, let's say, of tech that you're going in, I think remains key. Things like the algorithms, the structures that support it, etc. I think becomes very important. So knowing the basics, even though it may not be the most glamorous thing, it's really the most important thing, so that you have a solid foundation that you can build upon.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second one is it's easy to get caught up in different technologies or technology choices, or some people call it like the next shiny object. But I think in tech, to get really good, pick something, whether it's a specific set of technologies or one specific technology, and get really good at it. It's easy, again, to get distracted and lose focus. Once you get really good at one thing, it's then easier to move or to pivot into other choices that you have. So you may be really good at, say, one particular, let's say, front end stack, right? If you master that stack really well, again, doesn't mean you automatically know another stack, but you understand the fundamentals really well. Learning a new stack becomes a lot easier in that respect, because you'll find parallels between the two and an ability to laterally move between them. And I would say maybe the last point is, and especially, given that technology and software in general is like an applied field, I think the best way to learn is really by building. And so take as much time as you can building real world applications. And I think there's a lot of great resources online to help you do that in terms of problems that you can pick up and do. Because I think it's only through building real world applications that you really, firm up your chops as a technologist in that respect. So those are probably 2 or 3 things that I would maybe try and anchor on to help make that transition.
Before, everybody was saying, oh, you have to learn coding and send your kids to coding. Is that still the case? Is that important?
The way I look at it, Annie, is like, again, referencing the point on fundamentals. I think it's easy to get up and in some sense confuse coding with, similar to, like, maybe the closest analogy I can give is like math and learning calculation. I don't think necessarily that the act of like calculating itself is maybe super valuable or useful, because obviously you can get calculators to do that, or in this case now with the advancements in AI for basic coding, like computers can do that for you. But I think it's the fundamentals that you learn, what's behind it, that really sticks with you and makes it so that it's valuable to help you build additional skills and deliver value in that. But if you take it in a very narrow sense of like, I just know how to code or get it going, I think you're missing the point in that respect. So that's why I think the fundamentals it teaches you is very important, and I think those will carry you forward versus necessarily the act of the immediate application itself.
When I was working in banking,
Yeah.
we had people from so many industries. We had physicists, chemists, tech engineers doing, treasurers, finance jobs, sales jobs. Is that possible in tech? Is it possible to have a totally unrelated degree and still still do it in tech?
I have, I've had a lot of colleagues and friends and family members over time that have pivoted into tech. It's not easy, especially if you're, depending on how far of a field you're coming from and how much time it takes you to pick up the fundamentals, right? But it is possible. I've seen many people do it. I think ultimately what it comes down to, Annie, is like, are you doing it like passion is an important element of it? Because I think it's what carries you through going through those hardships and learning curves, and ultimately, find your calling. But it's really something that you have to enjoy doing. Otherwise, it's going to be like you're not going to be able to stick with it. And even if you stick with it, you're going to feel really miserable. So I think for me, it comes down to like, is this something that you're really passionate about doing? But I've seen people from all walks of earth kind of get into the field, and maybe it's not even their first field that they've gotten into, and they were successful.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned earlier that the tech industry is very fast paced, and actually life is very fast paced these days. So how do you keep abreast with all the changes?
I mean, first of all, in some sense, you have to face the reality that you can't know everything. There's just so much going on out there, and it's really not possible to stay abreast of absolutely everything that there is. So I think prioritizing, in some sense, what are the areas that you're going to spend time and invest time learning and going deeper, versus what areas, for example, even a broad understanding is good enough, basis your role, basis your responsibilities, basis, what interests you. I think is maybe the first point. It's tough because we all want to know as much as we can, but we also have to be realistic in that respect. We already talked about, learning fundamentals. I think another point is, I think it takes a lot of humbleness, humility, and curiosity to be able to, especially as you get, for example, more senior in tenure, like asking people. These people may be a lot more junior than you in terms of experience level, but asking them, learning from them, etc. I think is an important element of that. And then I think that curating some, let's say, I'm going to call them trusted sources that you continually use, whether they're internal within your organization or external, whether it's things like newsletter, courses, people you follow on LinkedIn, etc. But curation becomes super important because we're, in some sense, now we have the opposite problem where it's way too much information. Yeah. So curation becomes very important. And then obviously, last but not least, is like dedicating time for continuous learning. I think is important. As you mentioned, like with fast pace, we have a lot of things to do. It's easy for learning to take a backseat. And while initially we may not feel necessarily a lot of side effects as it relates to that, but over time, I think what you'll find is like your effectiveness, but also in some ways your motivation, as you see yourself perhaps not growing as much, starts to kind of kick in. So I think allocating, time and making this as part of your role versus something that you deem as like extra that someday you probably will not find time to do, I think becomes important.
And talking about this, what are these habits or routines that you have that keep you sane in all this madness and continuous learning and fast-paced change? What is it? What do you do to keep sane?
I think there's a few elements to that. I think the very first one, I think ruthless prioritization. I start out my day every day just trying to highlight like what's the most important thing, one thing I have to get done today, because it not only helps you drive focus for success, but it helps also drive your fulfillment. That once you do that task, then no matter what happens in the rest of the day, you can feel proud that you finished the day and got this one thing, important thing done. So the second thing I would say is, for me, some kind of physical activity, whether it's even as simple as a walk or doing training at the gym. I think the impact beyond just the physical, but really on your mental well-being, I feel is totally underrated and super important. Sleep is a very important part of this as well. I feel like, in some sense, as it relates to high performance, probably nothing is more important than a good night's sleep to be able to sustain at this level and at this pace. And then last, but I feel like certainly the most important element is, I think, time for connection with family, with friends, etc. Because I think no matter what's happening there, connecting with folks that you have a relationship with really helps keep you grounded. I would say keep you grateful as well for what you have and happy overall.
Yeah, I think being grateful, actually remember the things that are great in your life. It's something that we often miss. We just go through everything, and we just our aim is on the next great thing, and we forget about all the great things we've achieved already, or the great people in our life. And for me personally, that's something that when I get anxious and I think, oh, I have not achieved this and that and this and that, and I say, okay, calm down. Now that I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I say, come on, you climb Kilimanjaro, so calm down. Things are fine.
Yeah. No, it certainly helps. It certainly helps put things in perspective. But as you said, I think it takes a lot of intention to remind ourselves of this, because it's so easy to just focus on, even if it's one thing that is not going maybe as good as we want it to, and then let it in some sense take a disproportionate mental space and kind of worry in our minds. Yeah.
Tell me, have you been stuck in your job before?
I would maybe go even further, Annie, and say that if you don't feel stuck, maybe at various junctures of your career, you're probably either not pushing hard enough, or you may be super lucky. But I think for the most of us, getting stuck at various points of your career, I think, is very normal. I recall maybe one very specific situation where I had, at the time, I was relatively new to management, and I had taken on the role. I had, built the team. We had some challenges with specific projects, which I was able to address. I felt that things have started to basically, get in a good shape in terms of the team, the people that I had, the projects that we were delivering, the technology that we owned, etc. And I felt like, hey, I could do more than what I had. But at the same time, I was really worried in terms of hey, what kind of conversation should I have with my manager? How do I tell him that, hey, that I want more of a challenge than what I have? What will he think of me? Will he think that I'm, perhaps slacking off? You get all these thoughts, especially as maybe a not so experienced professional, in terms of is this a topic you should even open? And if so, how do you approach it? And again, going back to the point earlier about having the right support, I remember, I then decided hey, let me go speak to my mentor and really ask him hey, here's the situation. First of all, am I right in my assessment? Because then you start also doubting yourself. Maybe things aren't going as well as you think, etc. And so I walked him through what I've done, and then I told him hey, I wanted to talk to my manager. And he gave me some excellent advice, but more so, I think the fact that he listened to me was a big, maybe a proving point in terms of no, I'm clear in my thought process. What I'm asking for is reasonable. And I think he gave me the courage, really, that maybe I was lacking as an inexperienced professional, to go in and just have that open, transparent conversation with my manager. After that session, that mentorship session, again, not to say that going into that conversation wasn't maybe a little bit more, I was anxious, but I think after I had that conversation with my manager and the way that he reacted in terms of the level of appreciation he had for me to bring up the topic, and then my manager really took it at heart to say to try to find me opportunities. And then I think maybe it was 6 weeks later after that conversation, it so happened that an opportunity opened up in terms of another team. His manager had left, And so my manager was able to bring me these responsibilities and give me another team to manage on top of the team that I had. And I feel like when I trace it back, like this was a pivotal moment in my career, because then that launched me to help me grow to the next level, to be like a leader of leaders, not just a frontline manager. And again, if I go back, I think having that courage and taking that risk to do something that maybe didn't feel as comfortable, and felt hard at the time, but also the support that I got from my mentor. I think the two things together were super critical to get me to that outcome there. So that was just one example. There are many others, but I feel like at every juncture of your career, you will reach a point where you feel like you need to do something, and that's totally normal. Yeah.
Absolutely, and especially as you grow in ranks, it becomes, in the beginning of your career, you change jobs and you move, and then it's easier, and then it starts slowing down. But that's only normal, right? Because at the top there is that many spaces. But just like you, early in my career, I was absolutely afraid to go and talk to my manager and say something, because I had this thing that if I say something that I'm not happy, but I want something different, and they will
Yeah.
fire me.
Sure.
This is what I was thinking. They'll fire me, which is such a stupid thought.
I know now, looking in hindsight,
I'm
yeah, we
looking back
think
and
it's
I'm
like, how
thinking,
can we think that? Yeah.
I mean, how can, first of all, to fire somebody, now you have to go through so much pain and prove that it doesn't work, etc., etc. But I was just thinking that it was so stupid. But thank God I get rid of that. But people have these ridiculous thoughts that,
I mean, as starting out, even in our careers, we have preconceptions. I don't know where some of these come from, but I think that's where, having, very grateful for mentors that I had along the way that really helped bring that objectivity, that sanity into my thinking, because I think that, again, these mindsets, I think it's important to, in some sense, address them, because otherwise, even the way that you feel about your work, your ability to perform at a high level, etc., all kind of come down from that mindset. And so it's important to get that right in order to, perform at a high level.
yeah, it's the fundamentals. What you say to yourself in your head. It's very important. You were talking about, when I asked you about when you were stuck at your job, and you said that you were assembling a team and you were doing something. Let's talk about teams. How do you assemble a great team?
So I think for me, first and foremost, I think having a high standard is basically what I would put as kind of number one. I think both in terms of the hiring that you do, but also in terms of how you manage performance within the team. I think the way I look at it is the level of the team really rises or falls based on what you tolerate as a leader of that organization. So I think setting a really high bar is important. It's easier said than done, because, for example, when you're hiring, you may need somebody really bad for a position that's vacant and you're struggling because you don't have the person. But it's very important to make sure that, especially during those times, you don't end up lowering the bar of hiring and hiring somebody that really takes the team to the next level. Similarly, from a performance management standpoint, in some sense, it's easy to avoid these hard conversations of giving maybe critical feedback to a team member that maybe is not performing in a certain area, but is absolutely crucial to do if you want to, build, assemble, and sustain a high-performing team. The second one I would say is obviously fostering connection, whether between you and your team members, but also between the team members themselves. I think is very important, because this also helps with building trust, which in turn affects the team dynamics as people, assume good intent, help each other, etc. I think having clear goals and the connection between these goals and how the individuals are both recognized and rewarded, I think is important. And when I say here rewarded, I don't necessarily just mean from a monetary perspective, but also in terms of their own growth. I think the more these things are connected together, the more momentum you will build from a team perspective. And then lastly, I think feedback is really like the fuel of high performing teams, whether that's, being generous with praise where it's deserved, but then also having that radical candor to have these difficult conversations to drive performance. So these are, for me, like maybe 3 or 4 elements that I have that really, when I think of high performing teams, I kind of go back to in my maybe, let's say, management philosophy. Yeah.
Great. And let's jump into outside work interests and activities. And we can introduce them as a corporate creator, right? You are a corporate creator, right? What does it mean, and how did you decide to become one?
So at least the way maybe I think about it, Annie, is that like even within the context of, let's say, an organization or a corporation, we're all creating, we're influencing within our respective organization. I think for me, the way I think of this as this is in some sense an extension of that, but more external with respect to doing it more broadly and maybe publicly versus doing it within your organization. So, and examples of this include, like, you may be, for example, creating a presentation or a campaign or something within the confines of your organization, or you may be building influence and people are coming to you to either be mentored by you or learning from you, etc. And so for me, it's always been on the back of my mind in terms of how do I scale my impact beyond the boundaries of the organization. And so it's been now maybe about 16 months or so since I had time off. I was on vacation, and this thing has always been like an etch in the back of my mind. And finally, I decided, hey, let me get started and just write my thoughts on the topics that I'm really passionate about, which is leadership, growth, and career development. So I started writing, and at first my intent of like sharing my thoughts was really more around like paying it forward and sharing what I know with others, hoping that it helps somebody out there. But then little did I realize that in the process of doing that, the engagement that it creates and the inputs that you get from others, whether on your posts or by you being on the platform, reading others people's content, is a great sort of development opportunity for you, whether to sharpen your own thinking about existing topics or learning about new things. And then obviously the networking opportunity that it provides for you to meet great professionals out there from all walks of life, I think is so rewarding, similar to like the conversation that we're having now. And what's interesting about it is the fact that even within the organization itself, obviously Amazon is a very large distributed organization, but for me, like, I've met so many people from inside the company that have found me, or I have found them through this platform, as opposed to necessarily that I wouldn't have interacted with, if it was just related to my day-to-day responsibilities. So that's kind of how this kind of came together, at least for me. And it's something that I consider an integral part of sort of my, let's say, growth system and development system for myself.
Mm-hmm. No, that's excellent. And the last point you said is so true, because I mean, just like Amazon, I used to work in Citibank. It's a huge organization, but 200,000 people. You don't know them all. When you get on the platform, there are many who actually are there. Not a lot are posting, but they check stuff, and then suddenly you get to know people that you never knew before. It's
Absolutely.
a great point. Even only that's as a minimum is a great benefit for you, right?
Totally.
It's only a benefit. You're out there, you're saying what you think, people discover you. And how do you find time? That's the big question. You have
That's a big
small
question
kids,
and
right?
big challenge. Totally, yeah.
How do you
I
manage?
think, yeah, definitely. I would say the first thing is like it is definitely an investment of time. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it in that respect. I think, like, for me, it's like I've made it a priority, and when you make it a priority, you find the time to do it. a few things obviously helped me in that regards. I think the first one is in terms of content creation. I generally block out time like on my weekend to create content for the upcoming week, so that I have all my content scheduled ahead of time. And then during the week, it's mostly during either early morning or in the evening that I use whatever spare time that I have to engage with others, whether on my post or their post, etc. I think obviously once you do it for a while, you learn to get more efficient and effective at it. But yes, it is an investment of time. But for me, I'm super passionate about these areas and what I share, and also engaging with the community. And I think the combination of the priority and the passion really fuel me and help me keep going. And I think it's one of those things where, like, when I talk to a lot of people, it's a matter of like how much you want to spend and invest in. So sometimes we feel like you either need to go like on one extreme where this becomes in some sense your full-time job, or on the other extreme saying like, because of that, I'm not going to do anything. I think it's one of those things where you can make progress and you can be successful within it to whatever definition of success is for you, for whatever amount of time that you're able to spare doing it as well. So in some sense, I highly encourage people to participate and engage, even if it may not be with such a high time commitment there. So
great. And let's end the podcast on a bit more personal note. What was the best moment of your life?
My best moment of my life. It's a tough question, but I would say for me, I remember when I was graduating from high school. And at the time when the graduation ceremony was happening, obviously we didn't know ahead of time like what our final grades would be, or what, let's call it maybe classification or like honorable mention you would get in the graduation. But I remember at the time, like I received a high distinction and my parents were in the crowd. I remember when I was receiving my certificate, I think when I looked at my parents and saw how happy they were of this achievement, I think is a moment that's like forever etched in my memory as maybe one of the happiest moments, seeing how happy they were, how much happy it made me in that respect. So
I know what you mean exactly. And what is the worst and how did you overcome it?
I mean, like for me, at least in life, obviously there's a lot of challenges, but I feel like the only real worst thing, because it's irreversible, is unfortunately like the passing away of people that you love and that you care about. For me, probably the hardest moment of my life was, my maternal grandmother. At the time, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that was right before I was, I'm originally from Lebanon, and I was leaving to go attend university in Canada. And so I remember that moment when, I was saying goodbye to her, knowing pretty much with a high level of certainty that when I leave and go study, like I'm not going to see her again. Because probably by the time I'm able to come back, she will not be with us. So that to me is probably the hardest moment of my life. Like how do you stand in that situation without showing that the inevitable is going to happen, and try to be positive, but at the same time knowing the realities of life. That's something I like. That's a situation I'll never forget, and I don't know if there would be anything tougher than that moving forward. Yeah,
I completely agree with you because, as you said, it's irreversible. That's it. I mean, everything else in life is reversible apart from that.
Yeah.
Right. Let's finish with. We talked about a lot of things. What is one thing we don't know about you?
Maybe a couple of maybe in some sense facts about me that not many people maybe know. I used to be like quite heavier than I am today. At some point, during high school, I used to weigh like 105 kilograms. And
I
so
can't believe this.
when people, I know when people learn that, they're like, we need to see pictures, we need to see evidence. Trust me, it's true. And you probably don't want to see the pictures. So that's one sort of fact about me. Other facts, like in terms of one of my maybe side hobbies or passions, I like to collect, fragrances, perfumes. And so it's a great place to be in Dubai for that. A lot of like oud fragrances and things like that. So that's something I enjoy doing when I'm not working or doing anything online. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Now, this was such a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Omar. And I enjoy reading your LinkedIn post every day and then watching your videos, etc. And it's absolutely great that you find the time to share all your knowledge to everybody who wants to learn more. So it's so much appreciated. And knowing what the corporate job requires from you, it is absolutely amazing the time that you spend to help others.
No,
Thank you so much.
appreciate that, Annie, and appreciate everything that you do as well. The great content you share, and then this great platform that enabled me and many others that I've watched in prior episodes really share their stories and essentially, amplify our missions to help others as well. So thank you.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Change is possible. That's it.